It's been announced, finally. I guess it's not really a huge surprise given some of the videos and the content and everything dropping more recently here, but Rio is finally set in stone. We have a release date for Rio, and along with that, we have some quality of life updates and factories coming to Upland. So there's a few things that are kind of requiring their own little update video through the week here that we definitely need to cover. Hey there, John Henry here, ssftg. Welcome to the video. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome my friend. I hope to earn your like and subscription today. So first off, jumping into the first update, the quality of life update. This is something that we have been begging for, asking for, pleading for that be added into the game. And now the in-game property search is now powered by Google search instead of Mapbox search. And, as far as Mapbox search, there's nothing wrong with it as far as using it for US addresses and all of that, but let's be real here. What do people use when they're looking at maps? Google Maps, right? This is kind of that's the first thing. Nobody uses Apple Maps. You can end up in a parking lot in the middle of the desert. So, Google Maps is the go-to, maybe Waze if you're in the city. That's kind of the thing. So being implemented into Upland makes it significantly better because now, not only is it actually a little bit more utility-wise useful, it works. When I type in an address, it will actually bring me to the correct address. But along with that, this is also an implementation to utilize for international addresses, and Google has that on lock as well. What a shock. Google owns the world at this point. So global searches makes it significantly better. And one cool thing that you'll notice, and you might have seen this already, is that when you're doing searches in the search box now, any areas that are not in Upland will be grayed out. Oh man, how useful is that? Thank you. Holy cow. Not only do we have the global search features and everything else, but then it grays it out and it's part of Google, and oh man. So really, really awesome to see, because now hopefully we won't have any of these dead zones where nothing shows up or the totally wrong thing shows up. Fingers crossed this fixes a lot of those problems, and Google Maps being the backing of it, I think is a really good fix. The next big one is going to be factories. Factories is, this is huge, right? This is one that is absolutely a monster of an update, and not really one that, to be fair, we've known that there's going to be a way to produce and all of that, but there really hasn't been any teasers or anything like this, kind of a shock news announcement. Now we've got factories. So what are factories all about? Now, one thing that is to be noted, if you're going through and reading through some of this, and I want to make sure that it's not on my face so we can actually see this together here. So let me size this up like that. There we go. Okay. So one of the first things that really kind of stands out is, yes, we can get prepared, and we are excited to announce that starting today, Uplanders can begin construction, and I'll go into where we've started the Woodhood factory build. If you're interested in throwing some spark on there, by all means, because this is a, holy moly, it's a big chungus of a spark commitment. Jeez, oh Pete. We'll get into all the specs and all that in a second here, but the factory, which will power manufacturing of all 3D objects in the Upland metaverse. This is really interesting because remember, they were talking about all kinds of different things, decorations for your house, for your yard, nature stuff, right? Not only just cars and all the other obvious stuff, but this could open up the door to a lot of other things like outdoor decor and other assets that we really need to keep our eyes on. So not only are they basically saying, yes, these are coming and probably coming sooner than later, we're also dropping the way to create them ahead of time. So you got to start building now to get it ready. Now, this falls in line with basically the way that Upland does everything. It's all kind of similar to the frictions of the real world. If you want a vehicle, you gotta have it made through the assembly line. Doesn't matter if you want a brand new Tesla, you're gonna have to get on the waiting list. You remember the waiting list for the Series 3? Yeah, it was like 3 years long, right? So this is one of these things where this is similar to the real world. They have to have plants and ways to create these different structures, just like cars, just like everything else. If you want to build a structure on your property, it takes a spark commitment. You got to hire those builders. The same thing, right? So initially, factories are going to have limited functionality and size. It's something to be noted of. Uplanders, currently part of the outdoor decor beta, will be the first to use these factories, all right? So they're not going to be open to everybody, but the first to use these factories and produce their own items, and then later will be able to be shown in showrooms and sell these assets through all kinds of different places. So an incredible way for different things like nodes or racetracks or different things to create a new revenue stream. And not only is it a way to create a revenue stream, or at least another revenue stream for nodes and racetracks and all that kind of stuff, but it's also a way that we can utilize possible other things that we've been kind of hypotheticaling, right? If however that word works, talking about like billboards and these different advertisements. This might be another one of those things with that outdoor decor that we'd be able to use. Now, all Uplanders have the ability to build the factory on their property and prepare for future manufacturing. But remember, the first people in this are going to be in the outdoor decor beta, so it's not going to be open to everybody. Uplanders will be able to use their factories to produce goods for their own metaventures or for metaventures run by other Uplanders. So again, really, really cool, real life stuff. Amazon, although does have like half the world under their control, they don't have all of these factories with Amazon branding. They hire out to other manufacturers, right? The same thing goes here. You can hire out to other factories to do your producing for you. Really, really cool, because now this offers a way for us to leverage existing factories to trade between other Uplanders who really want to start quickly. Maybe they didn't have the spark commitment up front to get theirs built, or maybe they have so much demand that they need to outsource to other factories. This is a way that this can possibly come in. Now, one really big caveat to this is storage capacity. The storage capacity is relative to the plot size. So if your plot size is teeny tiny, you're only going to have a really teeny tiny area to store things. If your plot size is monstrously huge, you're going to have a huge amount of space. Caveat, it is rectangular in shape. You can't just mishmash it inside of a weird space. It's got to be able to fit inside of a rectangle. So that is something to note. When we were building the Woodhood factory, and actually let me just jump over to it really quick. When we were building the Woodhood factory over here in Bel Air, one of the things that I ran into is the odd shape of the property. The property itself, although is very, very large, is a really weird shape, right? So if I'm going to fit a rectangular plot in here, it's got to be like this. And this is really the only way that I could fit one in at the most size. Now, that leaves a lot of unopened space, and hopefully in future we'll have functionality for multiple structures. And realistically, this is already building multiple structures on a plot of land. I mean, think about it, really. We're creating our first structure, and then we're segregating another area, or designating another area separate from the first. That's basically multi-structure functionality already in the game. Looking at the spark commitments and looking at some of the specifications, the spark hours are 8,600. This is a big boy, right? This is a big one. Minimum spark stake 0.5 spark. It's a factory, right? I mean, let's be real here. And along with that, expected living units is 0. It's a factory. You don't live in a factory typically, although talk about a really fun place to live, right? Huge studio. The overall real concept here is that this is a big commitment. And the fact that not everybody is going to be able to utilize these factories right out of the gates even further makes that a big commitment. Just looking at the spark values and looking at, as an example, the spark exchange values, because of these factories, have already started to go up in spark value. But the builds on these, even fully maxed out, is still 16 days. It's a very long time on this, a big spark commitment to get these things built up. But that gives us a little bit of a time horizon as to how long we can expect to start seeing these things. Chances are they're not going to start dropping these things before we can manufacture them. That wouldn't make any sense. Or maybe they'll have like a handful of things that we'll be able to start producing at launch, but that will be possibly in a couple weeks. It gives them a little bit of time, and that makes sense because, well, that brings us to the next part, which is Rio, and that is on the docket now. We finally have a solidified launch date for Rio. Now, side note, if you do want to help us build this factory over in the Bel Air farm for Woodhood, this is a big, big project, and it's going to take a long time. I mean, looking at this thing, we don't have a huge amount of people on here yet, but 8,600 hours, and we're still at 157 days. Once our build, we actually have a targeted structure build completing today, and I think a lot of people will start splitting their structures over into this. But, I mean, realistically, our targeted builds, this is something that, this is going to take a long time, and I'm not part of the beta for the open program yet, so I gotta be honest, I'm not in a huge hurry, but at the same time, given the fact that we're probably on about a 2 or 3 week timeline for the first production lines of things and being open to the public probably within a month, getting this down to 30 or 40 days would likely be a good idea. So I'm going to try to put any extra spark above my targeted staking onto this one, although my main focus is still targeted staking within the Woodhood, because we got to get those done and get those completed. The Woodhood's already, I mean, we're pushing on to almost 20%. We got to keep rocking that bad boy. And of course, the elephant in the room is going to be Rio. Rio is coming to the Upland metaverse. Now, we already knew Rio was coming, to be fair, but we didn't know when. There was no solidified time slot. Well, guess what? We finally have a time slot. Holy moly, guess what? There's not a whole lot of time to get ready. Now, again, to be fair, we've known that Rio's been coming for a while, so to say that we haven't had time to get ready would be a little bit of an overstatement, I think. But let's go over some of the details here, because there are a lot of really, really interesting things going on here, and a few partnerships that they want to go over as well, which I think are really cool. So first off, Rio de Janeiro is going to be launching in Upland on July 26th at 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's 9 a.m. Brazilian time. Now, that's interesting to note, because that's giving us a heads up, basically, that every future international launch is going to be in their local time, which makes sense because they're going to be the ones that are going to want to participate, right? So as an example, if they launched Tokyo in the future, we're going to have to probably wake up at some weird times here in the US to make that happen. That's how it's going to operate, but it's really good to know ahead of time, because this is a smart decision on their part, opening it up with Rio, because it's not really that much of a time difference, right? I mean, 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's 8 in the morning here in Eastern Time. Okay, like, that's not really that big of a deal. Sure, it's a bit early on the Pacific Standard Time, but a lot of folks who are working on the Pacific West Side coast are mostly remoting into the East Coast anyway. They're probably awake regardless. So it's one of those things that kind of works out anyway, and it's not too early that the majority of the US can't participate as well. Another really cool announcement along with Rio de Janeiro in general is their first brand partner in Rio, and that's going to be the Mangueira Samba School. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but that is really, really cool, and we'll get into a little bit more detail into what that's all about too. But the Rio terminal sale, in order to actually get there, right, we've got the international terminal, all of that, well, that sale starts tomorrow, July 22nd, actually, at 4 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 a.m. Brazilian time. So again, those time slots are going to be favoring the location that these, or the geographical location that these places are going to be opening up in. The Rio stress test is going to be July 25th, 2022, obviously, at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, which will be 1 p.m. Brazilian time. Now, doubling back a little bit to Mangueira, it's one of the oldest, most revered samba schools in Brazil, and it carries a long tradition of popularizing samba music and dance as a whole. Obviously, if you've looked at Brazil in general, samba plays a little bit of a part, and generally dance as a whole makes up a large part of the overall culture. So this is a really, really big partnership that they're going to be pushing into, and it adds a lot of really interesting spice of life to the metaverse. I am very, very interested to see how they implement Samba with Upland and how they get that going. I mean, we've been talking about VR a lot. I mean, imagine, for example, and just theorizing for a second, that within Rio, VR headsets on, right? You can go into a Samba class and start your exercises, right? And you can log into your virtual home at your residence within Upland. I mean, it makes sense. And it would be a really, really cool other segue into music, because obviously Samba, along with dance, has a huge integral root within music in the whole culture too. So it's also another really big push on the music side of things. I mean, when we look at other metaverses, like as an example, and I know metaverse is a loose term here, but Fortnite, doing these different concerts with Marshmello, I mean, holy cow, incredibly successful, mind you, concerts in these virtual realms. It makes sense as to why these kinds of things are being pushed on so heavily, because it's the next generation of user content. Looking at some of the extra details here, Rio is planned to release on Tuesday, July 26th at 5 a.m. rather Pacific time, which is 9 a.m. local time in Brazil. Because Rio is such a large city, this will be a partial release, about 50,000 properties, covering much of the eastern coast, touching Guanabara Bay. So similar to Las Vegas, which we've only had the partial release of so far, properties in Rio will be released gradually, based on demand, of course, to better balance the property and inventory. I think it's an incredibly smart move. I think they should do this with basically everything, because that way we go back to kind of what we had before, where we can gauge the demand. How much in demand is an international city? If it sells out immediately, then they can piece out a little bit more. And that way everybody knows there's not so much pressure, like if you don't get in the first round, oh no, you're never going to get it. That's not the case. You just have to wait a little bit longer and the next release will come out and you can jump on board that one. So it's nice because the people who want to get in that first batch and get that kind of, that initial value of being the first to the party and having that kind of emotional connection to it, right? They're going to be the ones who are really thriving in this, myself included. I'm going to have a lot of fun on the first international launch. It's going to be a blast. But other folks who don't necessarily care about that and are just saying, oh, you know, Rio, it'll probably go up in value. It's a great investment. It's the first international city, kind of the genesis of international, if you will. It's probably going to hold a lot of value. And even though it's tier 4, which is a little bit of a shock to me, we'll get into that in a second, it's still likely going to be a very, very good value hold for the foreseeable future. I mean, it's the first international launch. Now, again, there is going to be a stress test, so before Rio opens on the 26th, they will have the stress test on Monday the 25th at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, which will be 1 p.m. Brazilian time. Because Rio will be launching in vanilla mode, all the collections are going to be hidden from us. We won't know until they launch, and that usually comes a week after the full launch. Now, to truly embrace the international cities, they plan to add Portuguese locations to the Upland app for a friendlier experience for all users. Now, for me, that's not really going to help me at all, but for those who have been begging for this implementation, especially since they're going to be going with that language, I mean, it just makes sense. So, of course, adding those types of things to the game, again, a lot of quality of life and user experience benefits to this, very welcome to see. As far as the city tiering, again, the city is being structured as a tier 4 with an FSA allocation of 27%. Treasure Hunt tier 4, man, that one kind of hurt me a little bit. I was really thinking they don't have any tier 3s. There's no tier 3s. They're launching International City. Perfect opportunity for tier 3. I didn't see Rio as a tier 4 city. I was kind of shook by that. I'm not gonna lie. I get the reasoning as for the FSA allocation to be able to lock it down for a lot more people to participate. I totally understand that aspect of things. But if that were the fear, then just launch, don't do a limited release, launch the whole thing, and just let it go to town, right? I'm kind of floored by the tier 4 on that one. That one really kind of struck me as odd. But whatever. It is going to be a tier 4 treasure hunt. A little bit disappointed on that one. I was hoping for a tier 3 so I could build out a tier 3 map to test it out. There haven't been any tier 3 cities yet. Hopefully we'll have one sooner than later. But outside of that, it is going to be a tier 4 city. FSA allocation 27%. They're going to be between 16 and 22 collections. But because it is a limited or partial release up front, we're not going to see all of those right out of the gates, just like with Vegas. No train terminals, but there will be airports. The send fees are going to be low end 10, high end 50, with the default set to 20. Now, I do have planned to be launching a collection speculation video, just like all the other city releases a little bit later. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but there are a lot of really, really fun facts about Rio that I think a lot of us already know. But if you haven't known about these or want to read through some really fun stuff, make sure to read through these, because Rio de Janeiro, that's the home to the Carnival, right? I mean, there's 2 million people a day. That is a huge economical asset to Rio, something that is going to play likely a big role in what is going to get launched in Rio. Along with that, the Christ the Redeemer statue atop of Mount Corcovado, which I'm sure I said improperly, just, standing over the mountaintop. These are some big key things that are going to be part of Rio, and I don't know how far we're going to be able to even mint into the area. It would be, could you imagine being the one to mint the statue itself? It's going to have to be a monument, I would assume. And man, if they Could you, a monument that they structurally build in Upland like that, a full out like statue? Oh man, that's gonna look really, really cool on top of the mountain and everything. And if they start adding, and this is my thinking here, the fact that they're going with Rio and they're adding Google Maps, speculation, I will say speculation, but imagine for a second now that they start adding height, right? Adding some topographical here, adding a little bit of depth to the map. Go to Google Earth. It's not that big of a difference going from Google Maps to Google Earth. And now we're starting to actually see, while we're racing around the tracks in Rio, the Christ the Redeemer statue up on the, I mean, could you imagine? Absolutely mind-blowing how cool that would be, not only to race, but just to be able to broadcast, to be able to see in general. Just mind-blowing. Getting to Rio is going to be really straightforward. This is going to be in the international terminals. We've got LAX, SFO, ORD, and JFK. Going from those, the cheapest, going flight-wise, is going to be from JFK. So if you're in New York, that is definitely going to be the cheapest one. But the one that I am at is in LAX, which is a bit unfortunate because that is the most expensive one. Now, I will say this, and something very, very cool that Upland does pretty much every new city release is that they are making city travel free. And even though the city costs, I mean, look at the city cost travel. It's cheaper than I thought it was going to be, honestly, but still 4,400 UPIX to travel from LAX to internet. That's not a small commitment for some Uplanders, laying down $5 to go in-game travel. Just traveling, right? I mean, that's something to definitely consider. So making it free for 48 hours starting on Monday is definitely a very, very smart move on Upland's part because that's going to get the participation rate very high. As far as the release schedule goes for Rio at 9 a.m. on Monday, the Rio de Janeiro stress test will begin with the Centro neighborhood, and the stress test includes treasure drops and rewards. The details will be revealed soon, they have here, but honestly, it's probably just going to be like all of the other ones that they just have a bunch of them popping up all over the place. Tuesday on the 26th at 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time or 9 a.m. Brazilian time, Rio City will launch. A 5-minute warning will be issued prior to the start of the city opening, just like normal, and that way we can go through all of that. Now, just like all of the other ones, if there are any issues with the launch, I'm sure there'll be some delays and all of that. But honestly, they just did a live launch in person in Vegas. Like, I doubt the Rio launch is going to be bad. All of the other ones have been really, really good. And the fact that they're doing a limited launch to keep the risk even lower on the stress side of things for the servers, I think this is going to be an incredible launch. I am super, super pumped about this one. There were also some very important notes that are kind of tucked way at the bottom down here that I just happened to run across. I thought it was just changing into Portuguese here. By the way, thank you, Upland, for doing this, because this makes the localization of people in Rio be able to follow. I mean, amazing work on this. Awesome, fantastic to be able to see all of that translation work done. That's not a small feat by any means. So, but one thing, as a partial city release, they will soon announce plans for additional properties, all that fun stuff. Also, the July 26th opening will not include Rio landmarks, which are reserved for future distribution. So this is giving us a heads up as to what these future ones are going to be. And here's the thing, right? I kind of look at this as a little bit of an extra heads up because some of these are going to be in high interest locations where most of these huge landmarks are. They tend to land in pretty important areas naturally anyway. So, like, as an example, Copacabana Palace. We've already been talking about Copacabana. This could be a really, really big heads-up list that we can utilize as kind of a clue where some of these big important areas might land. That's going to do it for this one, though. I hope you found this video useful. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and if you've got some extra spark laying around, feel free to drop it on 10550 Dulceta Way in Los Angeles, California. Help us out on our Bel Air farm and get this bad boy trucking along. We got a pretty big plot of exposure here. I think it ended up being 595 UP squared for size. The shape of it made it a little bit difficult to get it perfect, but we've got a decent size to get things rocking and rolling, and a lot of other folks who are looking to possibly build as well. So if you've got some extra spark, feel free to drop it on there because this big chungus is going to take some time. Look for the collection speculation video in the very near future. I don't have a whole lot of time to get that bad boy recorded with the rest of the launch going on Monday, Tuesday. But outside of that, if you have any questions, comments, or anything else, drop them in the comments below. You know I always love hearing from you. And until the next one, we will see you all in the metaverse. Thanks. Bye.